Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. From daring jewel heists to mysterious legends, every video uncovers the secrets hidden in the shadows. Stay with us, because here, every crime tells a story. Every neighborhood has that one house people whisper about, the one that seems ordinary from the outside, but hides something no one dares to imagine. Behind these closed doors, a secret was buried for years, hidden in plain sight. When the truth finally came out, it shocked an entire community and left investigators stunned. In this video, we uncover the chilling story of what was discovered behind closed doors, and how one hidden secret changed everything. The town was small, quiet, and ordinary. Rows of houses lined the narrow streets, with gardens that looked neat and peaceful. On the surface, everything seemed perfect, but as the years would show, appearances could be deceiving. Among the rows of homes, there was one house that drew little attention, a house where the curtains were always drawn and the doors always closed. No one could have guessed what secrets were hidden inside. For years, neighbors had walked past it without suspicion. Families greeted each other in the mornings, children played in the park nearby, and life moved on as usual. Yet behind those doors, something dark and disturbing was unfolding. It all began when Emma Collins, a young woman in her 20s, went missing. She was last seen leaving work late in the evening, her smile bright, her steps light, as though she carried no burden in the world. She lived only a short walk away from her office, and every day she followed the same routine: leave work, walk down the street, pass the row of houses, and unlock her front door. But that night, she never arrived. Her family raised the alarm when she didn't return. Her phone went unanswered, her room untouched. Days passed, and the search for her widened. Posters were pinned across town with her face on them. Friends and strangers gathered to search the woods, the streets, and the nearby river. But Emma seemed to have vanished without a trace. As police dug into her last known steps, a disturbing detail surfaced. A neighbor recalled seeing Emma that night, walking down the same street she always did. But he also remembered seeing a man following behind her at a distance. He didn't recognize the man, and at the time, he thought nothing of it. But the image haunted him when news of her disappearance spread. Detectives followed the lead, questioning residents, scanning surveillance, cameras from nearby stores. Yet nothing gave them answers. Weeks turned into months, and Emma's case slowly grew cold. Her family begged for the search to continue, but the trail had gone silent. Then, years later, another woman disappeared. Her name was Lisa Harding. Like Emma, she was young, cheerful, and on her way home from work. Her routine was nearly identical. She walked through the same streets, near the same row of houses, before vanishing into the night. Again, police searched tirelessly. Again, posters flooded the town, and again, there were no answers. Two disappearances in the same area could not be ignored. Rumors spread quickly through the town. Some believed there was a predator stalking the streets. Others whispered about the house with the closed curtains, saying it was strange how no one ever seemed to come or go, and yet lights flickered inside. Late at night, police knocked on doors, questioned families, and searched abandoned buildings. They even visited the house with the closed curtains, but the owner, a middle-aged man named Richard, appeared calm. He let them inside, showed them his living room and kitchen, and answered questions politely. Nothing seemed unusual. With no evidence, the police moved on. But behind those closed doors, the truth was far from ordinary. Richard was not alone in the house. Deep beneath the floorboards and locked away behind hidden doors, a secret life thrived, one that no one outside had ever seen. The rooms below were small, dark, and silent. And in those rooms, the missing women were kept. Emma had been there. For years, her spirit broken, but her will to survive unshaken. Lisa, too, was locked in another chamber, her cries for help swallowed by thick walls. Richard had built a world where he controlled everything, a world hidden behind a mask of normalcy. To his neighbors, he was quiet, but harmless. To the women, trapped inside, he was their nightmare. The pattern continued. Every few years, another woman disappeared. Each one young, each one on her way home. Police searched endlessly, but with no bodies, no clear evidence, and no suspects strong enough to arrest, the cases piled up unsolved. The town grew fearful, locking doors, avoiding the streets at night. It wasn't until a small mistake was made that the hidden truth began to unravel. One summer night, a neighbor walking his dog passed by Richard's house. The curtains were drawn, as always, but the window was slightly open. From inside came a faint cry, muffled and desperate. The man froze, listening, his heart racing. He couldn't be sure if it was real, but the sound haunted him. He told the police, who reluctantly investigated. At first, the officers found nothing again. Richard welcomed them, calm and smiling, and explained that the noise must have been his television. The officers searched quickly but didn't check deeper. They left, and Richard's secret remained safe. But the neighbor refused to let it go. He recorded the sound on his phone the next night, capturing faint words, pleas for help. This time, the evidence couldn't be ignored. Police returned with a warrant. They searched every corner of the house, pulling up rugs, knocking on walls, and finally, one officer noticed a section of the floor that sounded hollow. When they pried it open, they found the hidden staircase leading down into darkness. What they discovered beneath was beyond anything they had imagined. Emma was there, frail and weak, her eyes wide with disbelief as light poured in. Lisa was there too, crying and trembling. And in other rooms, they found evidence of more victims. Clothing, belongings, journals filled with Richard's disturbing thoughts. The town of Ashwood erupted with shock and horror. For years, the answers had been hidden behind closed doors, right in the middle of their neighborhood. The house everyone had walked past daily had been a prison all along. Richard was arrested, dragged out of the house as neighbors watched in disbelief. He offered no resistance, only a faint smile that chilled everyone who saw it. For the survivors, it was the end of a nightmare, but the scars of their years in captivity would never fade. The case shook the entire nation. News outlets swarmed the small town, telling the story of the hidden chambers and the women who had been taken. People asked how it had gone unnoticed for so long. How could such horror exist in plain sight? How could a man live two lives, one ordinary, one monstrous, without anyone realizing? But the truth was that darkness often hides behind ordinary doors, and sometimes the monsters are the ones no one suspects. The discovery inside Richard's house spread like fire through the town. Neighbors who had once waved to him from across the street now stood in shock, staring at the house as officers carried evidence out in bags. Some whispered that they had always felt something strange about him. Others admitted they never suspected a thing. Inside the police station, Emma and Lisa were taken to safety. Doctors examined them, shocked at their condition. They were malnourished, bruised, and mentally scarred from years of captivity. Emma could barely speak, her voice weak from disuse. Lisa trembled every time a door closed, as though the sound itself dragged her back into the nightmare she had lived through. Detectives tried to piece together Richard's secret life. They studied the journals found in his hidden rooms. The pages were filled with disturbing writings, plans of control, twisted fantasies, and lists of names. Some names were crossed out, others circled. It seemed Richard had been planning his crimes for years, carefully selecting his victims, studying their routines, and striking when the moment was right. The public demanded answers. How could the police have missed this for so long? How many women had suffered behind those doors? and how many had never been found. Richard himself spoke very little after his arrest. In interrogation, he sat calmly, his hands folded, his eyes expressionless. When detectives asked him why he had done it, he shrugged. When they demanded to know how many women he had taken, he smiled faintly but said nothing. His silence was as chilling as his crimes. As investigators dug deeper, more secrets were uncovered. Hidden in the basement were boxes filled with belongings, jewelry, purses, pieces of clothing, all taken from women who had vanished over the years. Some of the items were identified as belonging to missing women whose cases had gone cold long before Emma or Lisa disappeared. The realization struck hard. Richard had been doing this for far longer than anyone imagined. He wasn't just a kidnapper. He was a predator who had perfected his crimes over decades, hiding them in plain sight. News spread across the nation, turning the small town into the center of attention. Reporters filled the streets, broadcasting live updates. Crowds gathered. Outside the courthouse during Richard's first appearance, shouting for justice. The story captured the world's imagination not only because of its horror, but because it showed how evil could hide in the most ordinary of places. For Emma and Lisa, the days after their rescue were filled with interviews and therapy. They tried to explain what life had been like behind those doors. The rooms were cold and dark, with barely any light. They were given little food and forced to follow Richard's strict rules. Any attempt to resist was met with cruelty. Yet, through it all, both clung to the hope that one day they would be found. Emma, who had been missing for years, said she had almost given up hope. But when she heard the officers breaking through the hidden floor, she realized that her prayers had been answered. Lisa, still trembling, described hearing Emma's voice through the walls, the two of them whispering to each other in the silence to remind themselves they weren't alone. The town struggled to accept the truth. Parents looked at their children differently, warning them not to trust strangers. Friends looked at each other with suspicion, wondering how no one had noticed the signs. People replayed memories of Richard, the quiet man who kept to himself, who fixed his car in the driveway, who nodded politely but rarely spoke. He had seemed harmless. He had seemed invisible, but behind closed doors, he had built a prison. The trial preparation began. Prosecutors collected every piece of evidence they could. The journals, the belongings, the testimony of the survivors, all of it painted a picture of a man who had carefully hidden his crimes. The defense argued that without bodies for some of the missing women, there could be no certainty. But the survivors' voices were strong. They told their stories, even as their voices shook, because they wanted justice not only for themselves, but for those who had never returned. As the months passed, more families came forward, identifying items from Richard's basement as belonging to their missing daughters or sisters. Each identification was another wound reopened, another family forced to face the truth. The list of his victims grew longer, and with it, the horror of what had been hidden behind those doors. During the trial, the courtroom was packed. Survivors sat bravely, facing the man who had stolen years from them. Families of the missing wept as evidence was presented. The prosecutor described Richard's actions as a web of darkness woven over decades. Witness after witness testified. Experts explained the journals, the handwriting, the evidence from the basement. Survivors described their years of fear, of waiting, of hoping. Each word painted the picture more clearly. Richard's mask of calm cracked only once, when Emma described how he had told her no one would ever come for her. She looked him in the eyes and said, "But they did." The jury listened to every detail. And when the time came, their verdict was clear. Guilty on all counts. Richard was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The town of Ashwood erupted in relief. The monster who had lived among them was gone, locked away forever. Yet the relief was mixed with sorrow, because justice could never bring back the years stolen from Emma and Lisa, or the lives of the women who had never returned. Even after the trial ended, the scars remained. Survivors struggled to rebuild their lives. Families mourned. The house itself became a symbol of the horror that had been hidden so close. Some demanded it be torn down, unable to bear the sight of it. Others argued it should stand as a reminder of what had happened, a warning that evil can hide anywhere. For Helen Thompson, whose daughter had vanished 15 years earlier, the trial brought closure she had long prayed for. She identified her daughter's necklace among the items found in the basement. Tears ran down her face as she whispered, "Now I know. Now I can let her rest." The house was eventually demolished, replaced by an empty lot. But even as grass grew over the space, the memory of what had been hidden there lingered. People avoided walking past, and when they did, they lowered their voices, as though afraid to disturb the ghosts that remained. Emma and Lisa became symbols of survival. They spoke publicly about their experiences, urging others never to ignore the signs of danger. They reminded people that monsters do not always look like monsters. They can be quiet neighbors, polite strangers, or even friends. The story of what was found behind closed doors echoed far beyond Ashwood. It was told in documentaries, in articles, and in whispers in towns far away. Parents used it as a warning. Children grew up hearing it as a legend. But for those who lived through it, it was no legend. It was a reality that had stolen lives and changed a community forever. Richard never confessed fully. He never told police how many women he had taken or where all of them were. Some families would never know the full truth. And perhaps that was his final act of control, holding on to secrets until the end. Yet in the end, the truth that was revealed was enough to break his silence of years, enough to free the women who had suffered, enough to show the world that no secret, no matter how deeply hidden, can remain locked away forever. After Richard's sentencing, Ashwood tried to return to normal, but normal was something that no longer existed. The town had been marked forever by the hidden darkness that had lived among them for so many years. The story was told again and again, not just in Ashwood but across the country. Journalists visited the town months after the trial, looking to capture how people were coping. They spoke with neighbors who still struggled with guilt. "I passed that house every day," one man said, shaking his head, "and I never knew. I never saw. How could we all have missed it?" Teachers told their students never to trust appearances. Parents warned their children about strangers, even the quiet ones who lived nearby. The lesson became ingrained. Danger could be anywhere, even behind the doors you thought were safe. Emma and Lisa, the survivors, found themselves caught between two worlds. On one hand, they were free at last, able to walk in the sun, able to eat meals of their choosing, able to see their families again. On the other hand, freedom carried its own heavy weight. Crowds followed them wherever they went, cameras waiting for their words. Strangers treated them like symbols, but inside, they were still struggling to heal from years of fear and control. Emma spent months in therapy. Her voice, weak when she was first found, grew stronger as she learned to speak. Again about what she had endured. She described nights of silence broken only by the sound of footsteps above, mornings of dread when the door opened, and the crushing hopelessness that Richard had fed her every day. But she also described the moment she heard the officers breaking through the floor, the moment light poured in. "That sound saved me," she said softly. "That sound told me I wasn't forgotten." Lisa's journey was different. She found it hard to be in closed rooms. Every creak of a door, every flicker of a shadow sent her heart racing. But slowly, with support from her family and doctors, she learned to step into the world again. She spoke at schools, telling young people about the importance of being aware, of trusting their instincts, of never ignoring warning signs. The house where it all happened became the center of debate. Some wanted to destroy it immediately, to erase the symbol of pain from their sight. Others said it should stand, a grim reminder of what had been hidden there, a warning to future generations. In the end, it was demolished, leaving only an empty lot. But for those who had lived near it, the memory of the drawn curtains and the silence inside would never fade. Years passed, but the story never disappeared. Documentaries aired, bringing new details to light. Investigative journalists pored over Richard's journals, trying to understand the mind that had planned such horrors. Experts spoke about how he had managed to live two lives, one of a quiet neighbor, one of a controlling predator. But even with all the analysis, one truth remained. No one had ever known the full extent of his crimes. The journals hinted at more victims than the evidence could confirm. Some names remained uncrossed, some belongings were never claimed. For several families, the questions would never be answered. Their daughters, sisters, or wives had vanished years ago, and though Richard was suspected, their fates remained uncertain. The survivors carried that burden as well. Emma once said, "We were the lucky ones. We came back. But what about the others? What about the voices that never got heard?" Her words echoed in the hearts of families who still searched for closure. The town of Ashwood rebuilt, but the scars were always visible. The annual memorial became a tradition, held at the park near where Emma and Lisa were first seen walking free. Candles were lit not only for them, but for all the women whose lives had been stolen. Each flame was a reminder, each flicker a vow that their names would never be forgotten. Richard spent the rest of his life in prison. He rarely spoke, but when he did, it was never about remorse. Instead, he seemed to hold on to his secrets, as if even in chains he wanted to maintain control. Guards described him as calm, almost smug, a man who knew that his silence was still a weapon. He died years later, still never confessing fully. His death brought mixed feelings. For some, it was relief. For others, it was frustration that he had taken answers to the grave. But by then, the town had moved forward, determined not to let him define them forever. Emma built a new life in another city, away from the place where she had suffered. She studied psychology, determined to help others who had experienced trauma. She spoke at conferences, wrote a book, and became an advocate for missing persons cases. Lisa stayed closer to home, working with local organizations to support survivors of violence. Together, they turned their pain into strength, refusing to let Richard's actions define their futures. The story of Ashwood became more than just a crime story. It became a lesson. It taught people to look closer, to question what seemed too quiet, too hidden. It reminded everyone that evil doesn't always wear a mask of menace. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, behind a smile, behind a nod, behind closed doors. In the end, the secret that had been hidden for so many years was revealed. The truth came to light. And though the darkness had left scars, it also left behind resilience, courage, and a reminder that silence can be broken, that secrets can be exposed, and that even behind the darkest doors, the truth will eventually be revealed. You've just seen another chilling story from the world of true crime, but there are many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends. Don't miss what's coming next, because in the world of crime, the truth is always stranger than fiction.